All right, everyone, welcome to the last panel of the day and last panel here at PowerCon. This is going to be He-Man in Space, the New Adventures of He-Man animated series. I'm Jon Kallis. I'll be moderating. As a reminder, please no videotaping during the presentation, but you can take pictures. All of the panels for PowerCon are being professionally filmed and will be posted online at a later date.
My name is Adam of Grayskull. When good is threatened by the power of Eternia, I have the power! I, He-Man, was summoned to the future by the last of mankind to defend them in their hour of need. My old enemy, Skeletor, followed me. Now, here in the future, he has found new allies to help him in his never-ending fight against all that is good. Yet on Primus, I too have found new brave friends and a new family. Thus, with the power of the good and the way of the magic, we struggle against the forces of darkness. Good against evil. The battle continues.
All right, so with us today, we have the developer, and he wrote over half of the series. This is Jack Olesker.
Thank you.
We have one of the story editors, and he also wrote a few episodes himself, Francis Moss. And another writer on the series, J. Larry Carroll. So Jack, I thought I'd start off with you, if you could kind of tell everyone how you got involved with the New Adventures and started its development.
Absolutely. I was in my writer's lair and I got a phone call from Mark Taylor at Jetlag. Mark and I had worked together for many, many years when I was at Deke, when I was senior story editor over there. And he said, Jack, Mattel's decided that they want to reboot He-Man, want to set it in the future, light years from Eternia. He said, we want you to write a series Bible, and we're hoping to get a 65-episode pickup, but what we want you to do is write the first 5 episodes as episodic, leading from one episode to the next, so we can link them together and make a movie out of it. So I said, that's great, Mark. So he told me what they were offering, and I said, well, you know, I'm not going to argue with that. That's very generous. He said, the only catch is that you have to write the series Bible in 2 weeks, and we need you to write the first 5 episodes in a month. So, you know, I always say when I was in the Air Force, I was a helicopter search and rescue parajumper. I was the guy that they lowered on the hoist to pick up the downed pilots, and I went through survival training in the Air Force. And it was similar to that. I'm glad I went through it, but I never want to go through it again. So when they had the premiere of those 5 episodes all interwoven, they did it at MGM Theater in Culver City, and I went there. There's 1,500 kids screaming, and they got a live-action He-Man and a Skeletor up on the stage duking it out, and they showed all 5 episodes, and Mark calls me a week later. He says, they're crazy about it at Mattel. He says, we're a go for 65 episodes. And we went on from there.
So when you wrote the pilot episode, obviously He-Man had 130 episodes of kind of lore and mythos at Filmation. I'm going to play a clip here before you answer. One of the best scenes everyone loves in the pilot episode is when Adam reveals that he is He-Man to his parents, and that kind of sets off the whole new journey for him. So I wondered if, after I show the clip, if you could kind of talk how you had to deal with kind of He-Man's past with Filmation, and how you were able to then kind of develop it and move it forward.
Good.
My vision has come true. People have come from the future looking for you, but Skeletor has fooled them into believing he is you.
By the power of Grayskull,
He-Man, you, my son?
You have made me so proud, Adam.
Yep. Well, he figured that if He-Man goes away and they don't see Adam around. It doesn't take Albert Einstein and Marie Curie to figure out that they're one and the same. So might as well make this big reveal, folks. So that's the reason that we did that. It was, you know, it would be really obvious when he was gone and Adam was gone. So that's why we made the reveal.
Were there any stipulations of characters or places or things that you were specifically not allowed to use or reference back from the original series?
You know, that's a great question, John. And I remember when I did, I'm going to plug Masters Cast because that was one of my favorite podcasts that I ever did. And what an amazing job you guys do there. So I've been asked that question before. You know, there's some people that have a problem with Mattel. But I got to tell you something. I've done 1,200 episodes of television in a career of 40 years. I've done 17 motion pictures. And I've worked with virtually every major toy manufacturer in America and a lot overseas. I did a great little project that Bandai did all right on called Power Rangers that I created. But Mattel, I really have to say, they gave me such creative latitude. They gave me nobody telling me exactly what to do. They presented the first wave of the prototypes. They had 10 figures, and they said, look, let's please concentrate on these, and then the second wave will come along. But you know, a lot of people don't understand that Mattel is a business, okay? Their business is to sell toys. And I was fortunate to have grown up in a mercantile background. My family had 8 clothing stores in Chicago. So I understand that while what I'm writing is art, it is also a product, and there is an end user. And people say, why did Mattel do that? And why did they throw them all the way into the future? And why did they have them leave Eternia? Well, the reality is it reached a saturation point. How many He-Man action figures can you have? How many Skeletors? How many Man-at-Arms? How many Battle Cats? So they wanted to create all of these new characters, and that was the reason that they moved it away. But to answer your question, you know, I was never given a restriction, and I worked with such wonderful people at Mattel, Deborah Galliani, Karen Lee Brown. They said, Jack, if you want to create new figures, new characters, go ahead and do it. You know, I created Master Sebrian, who was modeled after my headmaster, true Renaissance man at Harvard School for Boys. He was a former Green Beret and was the head of the Great Books Foundation. Drissy was modeled after my now ex-wife. You know, there's a great line in Bram Stoker's Dracula where Count Dracula's talking about the relationship between his family and the church, and he says that relationship did not end well. You know, so but I didn't regret that. But a lot of the characters, Mara, you know, those are the Klingons and the Mites. You know, I love those guys. Sheriff of Gorn City. So those are all characters that Mattel had no problem with me creating new ones. So there was a wonderful latitude that they gave me, John.
And now, Francis and Larry, both of you worked on, Francis, you worked on Shera, the original Filmation, and then you wrote for both, you know, He-Man and Shera. What was it like coming into a completely different kind of He-Man and Shera environment, the space, new characters? How were you able to kind of adapt to how this He-Man works? Or were there any problems with that, kind of harboring back to Filmation, that type of thing as for a writer?
Well, I recall being a little disoriented because I had not only written for He-Man, I'd written a lot of crossovers with Shera. So I had a mindset, but you know, for a television writer has got to be part chameleon. You have to read the material, and unless yours is not the reason why, but to get it written or die. And so you figure it out, and it was fun. It was fun to turn that over. I forget how many years between the original show and the reboot, but it was, you know, it was nice to take a fresh take on it because creatively speaking, I think we pumped all the juice out of He-Man anyway.
Yeah, the thing I remember most, I when I started working in animation, my first job was at Filmation, and for Shera, He-Man was already in progress and staffed up. So He-Man was kind of a little bit distant to me. So when this version of He-Man came around, I was working for Jack Mendelsohn who's a story editor, supreme. I think I learned more from Jack than probably anybody else I ever worked with in the business. And his take on it was, this is another job we have to take on. It's not like, a whole new world. It's not like anything else. We know what we have to work with, and let's, get the job done. And often, I always thought about series television generally. It's kind of, all about Little Shop of Horrors and Audrey 2, series television is like Audrey 2. It's feed me, And so almost whatever, your personal trauma or difficulties are, 2 scripts a week, that's the rule. Because you have all these people, artists waiting to draw some pictures and voice actors waiting to do the voices. So that part of it, I had been working with Jack for a few years, so I kind of had that part down. I think the most difficult thing for me, actually the only difficult thing for me was, and I don't know where this came from, I'm tempted to blame Mattel, but people have been saying nice things about them, so I'll refrain. When you would write a scene, every character who's on the screen has a job to do in that scene. Develop his little story or advance the plot. But for some reason or another, we were instructed in our scenes to put in a bunch of characters who had, mostly from Skeletor's gang, who had nothing to do. They just stood there in order, I assume, to sell toys. And so that was awkward. It was kind of like, it took a little of the fun out of it. Although on the plus side, the best scripts we got and were produced ourselves were ones that had a lot of fun in them. And I would think, just from seeing some of the original He-Man, they had more fun in them. There was a little more room for humor and a little more room for, pratfalls and things like that made it more fun to write, and I think more fun to watch.
Well, speaking of Mattel, you kind of led into my next question, and I'm going to show a clip for this as well. But shortly after the cartoon series began, Skeletor's appearance changes as he has a new toy in the line. Right. So after I play the clip, my question for all of you is, how do you deal with working with a toy company when they absolutely want you to put A, B, C in the cartoon because the new toy is coming out? So this is when Skeletor's transformation happened.
Because I am greater than the Tri-Sword Galaxy. Oh, yes. I am greater than the universe. I am greater than all.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in this business probably longer than most of the people in this room are alive. On Valentine's Day this year, I celebrated my 70th birthday, so I've been in children's television for a long time. Now
You're just a kid.
I feel like a kid. Aging is for those that don't know any better. So I've been around for a long, long time. And the bottom line is, whether it's the studio or whether it's the toy company or whoever it is, they're writing the check. And nobody's breaking your arm to work on the show. Now, as long as I'm not compromising what we call my creative integrity, they're calling the shots. There was a wonderful, wonderful executive at Universal named John Goldhammer that I took a project to once called Fast Money, about 2 young guys that one guy owned a repo company and the other was a writer, and the buddy says, you're not making any money writing, work with me, we'll repossess stuff. And they'd get into these weird things. They'd repossess a generator from a witch's coven and they'd have a curse put on them. And we went in for a meeting with John, and he said, I really like everything. He said, the only thing I don't like is the repo guy's sister that she likes the writer. So I said, what repo guy's sister? So he says, the repo guy's sister. So I looked at him, John, and I said, John, what repo guy's sister? And he looked at me and he said, kid, you're going to do well in this industry. So, the bottom line is sometimes you got to let them play the music and you got to be able to dance to the tune. Now, as long as it doesn't interfere with the creative process or the integrity of the show, I'm okay with it. When it becomes problematic, I'll be the first guy to say, I had nothing to do with Skeletor's eyes, okay? But you know what? You want to sell it you want to change it to sell a little bit more product? I'm pragmatic about it, okay? And as long as it doesn't change the creative, artistic integrity, I'm okay. Over to you, Francis. He's going to tell me I'm full of it now.
No, I agree with Jack. I mean, we all know that the purpose, they say that, you want to get eyeballs, and the reason you want to get eyeballs is to sell your product, and sometimes the product is whatever comes on in between the acts of the show you've written. But sometimes and very often in animation, it's the characters in the show that you're writing. So, it's not that we didn't get that, I think I do recall talking to Mark Taylor, I believe, about that specific thing, And he's a very nice guy, I think the world of him. He was a very good producer, but it was kind of like just shut up and write, and don't have a fuss about things that you have no control over to begin with. It's just a waste of your energy and a waste of my time. So that was, it wasn't really a lesson. I kind of knew that going in, but you kind of have to, stake your claim for artistic integrity or the honesty of a scene. Why is this person sitting on a rock over here, without a line of dialogue, without an action, Yeah, okay, I get it. Let's just move on to the next scene. So that was, I wrote a ton of different shows, and I never really had that big of an issue with things like that. It mostly didn't happen. Somebody goes in a scene, they have something to do. They have an interaction. You're building their character, or you're pushing the story along. And if it's not that, then it's, it just seems a little, obvious to me what was up. And I suspect that 99.9% of the audience didn't give a crap. So it was just, fussy artist, complaining writer, which is, I believe, the number one job description for most writers is complainer. So it was a lesson, I guess, in how to balance your own skill set and abilities and storytelling with the demands of the business part, And it comes up in some ways in every show I've worked on. That was one that has stayed in my head.
Yeah, I think somewhat controversially, but one of the fun things about writing, for me, about writing television is that you have to solve a lot of problems that nobody will ever see, but if you do your job right. And things change along the way. So I sort of had to, where you've got to rewrite because the script is running long, or rewrite because it's running short, which is usually we have to add new material, or an actor is not going to be available. And you can complain about it all you want, but your job is to find the solution. It's like two kinds of people in the business: the people that create problems and the people who solve problems. There are a whole lot less of the people who create problems because they just have the final say. But figuring those things out, and to me, it was always a challenge to see how am I going to take, especially if it's a toy that's being introduced, how am I going to introduce this so that it's a seamless addition to the whole universe.
Right.
And I won't say that I've been 100% successful with that, but it just, that's the job, that's what it is. And you there are people that give orders and people who follow orders. And I did a couple of things with Chuck Norris, who is Chuck is an amazing guy and is really nice as long as you agree with him. But and a lot of people would try to get into arguments with Chuck, and I always said, well, I've told Chuck one time where I think what he wants doesn't work, and if he says, no, we're going to do it my way, it's fine with me. Somebody asked me about that, and I said, well, when I have a top 10 show, we're going to do everything my way. But until then, you got to make the show work as best you can and follow whoever the creative guidance, providing that, whatever there. It's like just to match what's needed.
Now, earlier you mentioned Mara, and while the original He-Man series had kind of a strong female presence with Teela, who did have a guest appearance on the New Adventures, kind of Mara's role as the series went through the 65 episodes kind of morphed and developed kind of into she was the Teela of the series. And just recently they actually brought Mara back in the new She-Ra and the Princesses of Power cartoon on Netflix. So I'm going to play a clip from New Adventures, a clip from She-Ra, and then if you could kind of talk about how you took Mara from what she was at the beginning into her journey till now.
My whip! Surrender, Critter, it's over! Mara?
Good. So, a lot of people don't realize it, but New Adventures of He-Man was groundbreaking in one specific way. It was one of the first children's television series that was episodic, that it went from episode to episode to episode, and you had a series arc. With most television, unless it's episodic, take Friends, Seinfeld, any of the animated shows from the old days, whatever the episode is in the beginning, that's the way it has to end up being at the end of a particular episode. Not so with New Adventures. It would change and characters would grow and evolve, and that was one of the things that was very, very exciting to me. I've always been very big on female empowerment. I feel that there's a void of entertainment that shows girls and young women that are in the lead roles in animated series, and that young girls need to have those role models that they can look up to. Thank you very much. Thank you. I remember when we took our daughter Zoe to see Brave, wonderful film. She was 8 years old, and she was, wow, girls can do that, When she was 5 years old, I used to drill it into her. What can a girl do? What can a girl do? She'd say, anything a boy can do. When she was 9 years old, I knew the answer. I said, could a girl fly the space shuttle? She said, Daddy, today a girl is flying the space shuttle. I said, could she be in charge of the space station? She said, today a girl is in charge of the space station. When she was 14, I said, what can a girl do? Instead of saying anything a boy can do, she said, anything. I knew my job was done. But it's important for all that labor in children's television to provide those role models. So with the case of Mara, it was a great opportunity to show her evolution, to show her becoming a strong woman. I'm blessed. My wife, Kim, is a United Way president and CEO. She's an Irish gal. So, she's plenty tough. I always say I'm IBM, Irish by marriage. And she's a great role model for our daughter. And that was one of the things that I really wanted in those characters in New Adventures. And I cannot tell you how stunned and surprised and grateful I was when I saw Mara make her appearance in She-Ra. It was delightful. So that's why she evolved. I was delighted that she evolved, and I certainly had a strong hand in helping her evolve.
Now, you did get to do 65 episodes of the New Adventures of He-Man, and we've talked about this before and online, but for the folks here, what were your thoughts on how you would take the series had it been greenlit for a second season, which would have most likely been another 65 episodes at the time.
You know, when New Adventures first came out, I mean, man, you know, I thought they were going to lynch me, okay? It was like, what are you doing? You're pulling them away from Eternia, and they're leaving behind family and friends, and what's going on here? And, you know, the first argument was that He-Man would never leave Eternia and his family and friends behind. Well, our brave servicemen and women leave family and friends behind constantly to go and do what their duty is to help people around the world. So that wasn't an issue for me. But the problem, and I have to be fair to Mattel, you need to remember when this series came out back in so many years ago, there was no social media. There was no Facebook, there was no Snapchat, there was no Twitter. So Mattel was tasked with a near impossible mission of taking this show and dumping it on to everybody. All of a sudden, what's going on? They pull them away. My idea was, you know, if they had the internet back then and had Facebook, they could have said, look, this is just going to be a new adventure. And eventually we're going to come back to Eternia. And my thought was that I wanted to come back in season 2 to Eternia and have He-Man come back and have Skeletor and Slushhead and Flog and some of the Gleanons and the Mites and certainly my Critter, who I love so much, have them all come back and find out that Eternia had become a very different place in his absence, that Man-at-Arms had no choice to take over the throne and become a benevolent dictator. And the sorceress and Tila and Shera had created a triumvirate to try to oppose him. And He-Man came back and he said, what's going on? And that's where I wanted to pick up in season 2. Regrettably, it never happened. And I got to tell you, you know, it's a hole in my heart that we never got the chance to do that second season. But that's where I had hoped to go. And again, the problem was there was no social media. Everybody couldn't be prepped for it. They just dumped it on them.
Well, before we open it up to questions, I wonder if each of you could kind of give your final thoughts on working on the New Adventures of He-Man, kind of its legacy. It did get a nice resurgence given the Masters Universe Classics action figures that a lot of the New Adventures characters and all 65 episodes were re-released on DVD.
Good, you guys. Age before beauty.
Yeah.
We've worked together for 30 years, so I'm allowed to give him a chance.
If it wasn't for ragging on Jack, you know, life would be empty, I have to say. I think what I recall is the most enjoyable parts of writing episodes and editing was, it seemed, I mean, as I say, I never worked on the original He-Man, so I'm comparing kind of blindly here a little bit. But it felt like we had more opportunities to put in humor in the episode. Sure. And I just, 2 episodes that I wrote, I thought about, even the titles themselves. One was Council of Clones, and the other was Planet of Junk. I mean, you're not going to get, you know, high drama with titles like that. You know, you're just not, you know. But it's okay. You know, it really proved to be okay. And the powers that be were all for it, because stuff that gets kids laughing, I suspect, also gets them to buy toys or to demand that their parents buy the toys. So I think of all the episodes that I story edited and wrote, I think that was a kind of a theme that really kept me going, because my first job with Jack Mendelsohn was a story editor on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And of course, that was rife with humor, and that was, I think, one of the big points of the show for a lot of people. The one thing that didn't seem to be much in He-Man, maybe it was a little bit, is that we did do in Turtles a lot, was to have a lot of elements that if the parent was going to sit down and watch the show with these kids, or her kids, there was going to be something that would be only a joke that only a parent would get, which kept them watching, kept them entertained while the kids, you know, maybe went over their head or not, but it didn't matter in terms of their interest and excitement in the story. So I have to say, the New Adventures, as I say, was not something that I say, oh, well, this is like the old He-Man, this is not like the old He-Man. For me, it was a whole new show.
Right.
And we could approach it just in that way, and I think it was very successful.
Well, it was nice in a way to get away from the original He-Man because it was, as I think Jack mentioned earlier, but it was a little straight-laced, and there were, I don't know if you've ever noticed or not, but He-Man never strikes anybody with a sword or anything with a sword, chopping down a tree was straight verboten, and then we had those morals at the end of the show, which I hated those. I was like, I got to one point where I refused to do it. I would just go back and look through previous episodes and find a moral that fit whatever I was writing, and then I would just use that moral for the story because and the show was over for me by the time I got to that nonsense. But the New Adventures it was fun to be looser. It was much more contemporary. At the time that He-Man first started, there was a different world, different marketplace, and it changed it. But it was nice not to feel so constricted.
Yep.
You could, for example, you could never have done on He-Man someone disguising himself as He-Man to do something nefarious. Or you would be clobbered with the Shazam story, which was did you ever get the Shazam story from Arthur?
Pardon me?
Arthur Nadell, who, God bless him, he gave me jobs a couple of times when I really needed to work, and was very supportive, but he had his idiosyncrasies, and one of the things he would do, and you knew you crossed a line when he would start telling you about, on Shazam, this letter he got from a parent who was very upset. They said their child was upset because it was an episode where Shazam, if you remember the old 70s effect Mission Impossible, where Shazam robs a bank and then he takes the mask off and you find out that it was actually a bad guy in disguise. And Arthur was so upset by this one frickin' letter that anything that came close to that, you got the Shazam lecture. And it was the show. It was, but that's pretty constrictive when you can't even have it's a very basic dramatic device of someone being an imposter. But so it was nice. It was nice to see that. It was nice to see how the characters worked in there.
About 6 months ago, my Rotary Club asked me to make a presentation, talk about my industry and my history in the entertainment industry. And I talked all about Power Rangers and Care Bears and all the different programs that I've worked on. And at the end, I opened it up for a Q&A. And one young lady said, "Mr. Olesker, why do you write?" Wow, what a great question, I've been doing it for so long. I don't think I've really thought about it that much. I just do it. And I related a story to her that I'll relate to you. About a year and a half ago, Kim and I were at a pub that we go to, and every once in a while the owners or the bartender will out us to couples from out of town, and they'll say, "Oh, Jack did the Care Bears and the Power Rangers and He-Man." And there are 3 couples from Chicago, and I hear them on the other side of the bar. They're chanting, "Power Rangers, Power Rangers." They're sending me like shots of fireballs and stuff, and I'm arm wrestling with these young guys. So Kim and I are starting to walk out, and this one young lady comes up to me and she says, "Mr. Olesker, can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Well, only if you call me Jack." I said, "Mr. Olesker's up in heaven looking down." I said, "He was a tough businessman. Maybe he's down below looking up. I don't know, So I said, "What can I do for you?" She said, and we're in a big tavern. There's a lot of people around. She says, "I grew up in a very dysfunctional family." She said, "My father was verbally abusive to my mother. He used to yell at her almost every day." And she said, all week long, I'd wait for one thing. She said, I'd wait for the Care Bears. She said it was my She said it was my oasis. And she said, "I just want to thank you for saving my childhood." And wow, And, I'm not saying it to build myself up. Like I said, I'm a tough guy. My fingers are all broken from combat. But when this girl said that, it was like, oh my God. And she said, "Would you mind if I hug you?" And I said, "Honey, come here." So the reason I write is because I can touch people's lives I can bring a smile to their face. I can do something that endures and allows them, like you, 30 or 40 years to look back and say, wow, wasn't that wonderful? It still makes me smile. There was a young man at the show today, and he brings over his 4-year-old girl, and he says, my daughter drew this for you. He said she wanted you to have it to thank you for everything that you do. And she says, you touched my heart. I said, honey, you touched my heart. So that's the reason people like Francis and Larry and all of those who are no longer with us, towering figures like Larry DiTillo and Dean Stephan, that's why we write, because we touch people's hearts. And for New Adventures of He-Man, gosh, it got off to such a bad start. But when BCI released that collection, and so many people came back and gave it a second chance and said, okay, I accept it as a separate adventure. And you know what? It's pretty darn good. It felt like when I served in the Vietnam War, and I was a kid. I didn't know anything about politics. I just thought, I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to serve my country. And it was so bad back then. But when I got back, it was bad for a long time too. But things changed over time, and now there's these welcome home movements for Vietnam veterans. I'm glad that I lived long enough that people thank me for my service now. I'm glad that I lived long enough that people gave New Adventures a second chance. And I'm glad that they look back and they say, you know what? It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. That's worth the world to me. And that's why I write, and that's why I come to conventions.
All right, we have a few minutes left, so I'd love to open it up to audience questions if anyone has one.
I guess we'll start off with saying thank you for your service.
Thank you. It means a lot to me.
Yes, I was also one of those people who found the series to BCI. I thought it was just complaining of Mural, and I was like, no, action politics is really good. And when you start watching everything, you work for Mural, and I definitely see the heart of the series that I saw in the question is, there's an episode of Time that I guess Totila is.
I don't think your mic's on. Can you talk?
That's okay. So there's an episode of Once Upon a Time where Tila shows up.
Ah, great. I love that.
Well, the thing was, she showed up with a long-haired blonde with a sword or pink. And was it originally Shera? Was it an auto gun? Or was there some sort of disconnect between the character designer and the show? It was like a weird, visually confusing situation. So I was just curious if it was originally intended to be one character and you had to substitute for Tila because of some sort of...
I would have paid you to ask that question, okay? That's called giving me like a cream puff, okay? First of all, that episode was written by a towering talent named Misty Taggart, okay? One of the most talented writers in children's television. And Misty wrote a wonderful episode, and it was about homesickness. I mean, God, it just resonated. It was so beautiful. And you're right, she had a different color hair, okay? And people have asked me that before all the time. And I said, you know what? A woman has the prerogative to change her hair color if she wishes to do so. So there's a country song that says, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Next.
Hey, I've got a question. So I know Mattel dictated a lot of the character designs, but for the characters that you created, like Mara, like Drissy, and like Krita especially, did you have any input on that? Like, did you say, when you created the character of Krita, she's got purple skin and giant red hair and...
Yeah, the answer is yeah. I had a lot of input on the characters that I created. I would do a mini bio on them and say, this is the way I wanted her to look. I wanted Krita to be just really tough, I it was a kid's show, but I always wanted to write a scene where Krita says, Skelly, you've been bad. You need some discipline, But, it's a kid's show, okay? But she had that whip, didn't she? But yeah, I specified the whip and I specified the the high boots and everything. And gosh, so much to Mattel's credit, they gave me that latitude. And, if you ever saw my ex-wife, she was Wilhelmina model. I mean, I sent them pictures of her, and they made Drissy look just like her. So, in many ways. But they gave us a lot of latitude, and I was able to have that input, Sheriff of Gorn and Glenons and the Mites, very near and dear in my heart. So yes, they gave me a lot of latitude, and that's why, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mattel.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Certainly my pleasure.
Hi. I actually had a slightly two-part question. First was that I understand there's a lot of constraints you were under, the first being the 2-week deadline. I mean, that's restrictive as heck. And, dealing with Mattel and these people have to be here and do dolls and such. Were there any things that you wished you could have gotten in that maybe didn't make it in, or something that you would have wanted to change? And the second's more fluff. Like, do you have a favorite character?
And what, honey? Second part was what?
Do you have a favorite character?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good. Francis, Larry?
In New Adventures, I'm going to go for He-Man. I was really, I thought the growth in the character between the two series was really refreshing.
Very cool.
So that...
I think He-Man less for that because, as I said, I didn't really know about the first show, but more about he had a sensitivity in this show that he did not have, to the best of my recollection, in the first show, about people with, not disabilities exactly, but people who struggled, and they didn't have to be particularly debilitating struggles, but just something that for him might have been even something he could do without a thought, and for somebody else it was difficult. And I saw that as a real strong aspect of his character.
Yeah. If there was one thing I could change, it's in the first episode, I would murder every one of those scientists. Oh, God, Geppel. Oh. I used to have like nightmares about these guys, but that I would change because I felt they didn't serve any real purpose. And the problem when you have extraneous characters, and I know Francis and Larry alluded to having characters in the background. Anytime you give an extraneous character a line or two of dialogue, it takes away from precious running time that you want to devote to your main characters and your storyline. And I felt they served no great purpose. Yeah, they were funny and they were cute and everything, but God, the voices, it was just incredible. As far as my favorite character, hands down, and I've said this on HeMan.org, it's Krita, okay? I love the idea of powerful, confident females, okay? To me, and I hope we don't have any kids out here, it's to me the sexiest thing in the world is a woman that's confident. And that was certainly Krita, and she may have been, a villainous character, but man, she just didn't take anything from anybody. And reminds me of a little Irish girl that I know that I've been married to for 24 years. And, I like that and I respect that. So that's why I was just always crazy about Krita. The second character, of course, He-Man and Skeletor, but the second character is Master Sabrian. And as I said, I patterned him after a beloved headmaster who was a former Green Beret and head of the Great Books Foundation in Chicago. So that's my two favorites.
Thank you.
Thank you. The one thing that I will say before we close, and I've told so many people this at the convention the last 2 days, and I know that I speak for Larry and that I speak for Francis because you're looking at two true professionals here, okay? You're looking at two icons in the industry. Writers, producers, directors, and actors are nothing without fans. So we are really the ones that need to be thanking you, okay? And I mean that from my heart. Good, John.
Well, on that note, this has been He-Man in Space, New Adventures of He-Man animated series. And certainly I hope after that, if you have not checked out the series again, check it out again, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Let's give these guys a big round of applause.